let's talk about the sad fact that around the world today, 1.5 million babies or infants die every year because of the fact that they are not being breastfed. Now, when I first heard this statistic, I thought to myself, what causes these deaths? How can just the simple act of choosing not to breastfeed a child, how can that result in so many infant deaths? I know that I've heard that breastfeeding is best for the baby, but how can the simple choice of feeding a baby with a bottle lead to that many deaths around the world? So I'm going to try and explain that and break it down for you. Firstly, most of these deaths are occurring in developing countries, in resource-poor countries. And sadly, these are areas that have been targeted by formula manufacturers since sort of the late 1950s, when formula manufacturers saw that there was a big market of mothers that could be potential consumers of their product. But how does the simple act of choosing to feed a baby with a bottle, how does that lead to so many infant deaths every year? Firstly, when a mother breastfeeds her infant, the breast milk itself contains something called passive immunity. And passive immunity is basically the fact that breast milk contains antibodies, which are protective compounds that are specific to the area in which the mother and the child are living. And those protective compounds prevent infection in the baby. So if there's no breastfeeding happening, there's no passive immunity being delivered from the mother to the infant. Secondly, in many parts of the world, we have limited access to clean water. And formula is usually bought in the powdered state, and it needs to be mixed with water. So unclean water or contaminated water actually enters the baby via the milk that they're drinking. The milk itself becomes a risk. And finally, in many parts of the world, mothers and their families are still struggling with the effects of poverty. And poverty will often lead to dilution or watering down of the formula in order to make it stretch, to make it last longer. And that dilution means that the babies become malnourished. And malnutrition, we know, is very closely linked to immune suppression. That means an inability of the baby itself to fight off any kind of bugs or germs that it's exposed to. So what you can see here is that this simple choice of what to feed an infant can lead to, on this side, a great deal of decreased protection or lack of protection for the infant, and on this side of the equation, an increased risk by exposure to contaminated water and also lack of access to sterilization equipment for the bottles and all of these parts that need to be sterilized. Now, the result of this is that the infant is much more likely to contract an infection, and it's an infection almost always of the gut or the GI tract, and that infection will lead to diarrhea in the infant. And in infants and children, especially in developing parts of the world, infants and children can die very quickly from diarrheal disease. Diarrhea leads to rapid dehydration of the infant, and that dehydration leads to 1.5 million unnecessary infant deaths every year, when a perfectly safe and readily available source of food would be there. And yet, because of the fact that formula manufacturers have convinced this mother to go this route rather than this route, we are seeing this tragic number of infant deaths every year.